Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your time. I am amazed at the vantage point you have of Houston's innovation ecosystem. Besides being editor of InnovationMap, you also host the weekly innovation podcast. And back in March, you conducted almost 12 or a dozen interviews for South by Southwest. So you are deep into Houston's new future. So I really appreciate you sharing your time. And I thought it would be really fun to have you on the other side of questions. So are you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah, this is very, very different. Switching sides of the table for sure.
All right. Well, this is going to be fun for those of us who are watching. Okay. So it used to be that any reference to innovation really kind of conjured up a very narrow view of microchips and Silicon Valley. And so my first question is, how would you describe the broader view of innovation right now? And how does that influence InnovationMap's approach to covering that sector?
Yeah, I think it's been relatively recent that we've really seen the use and maybe sometimes overuse of the word innovation. But really, historically, Houston has always been an innovative city, from healthcare and oil and gas to where it is now. I think also very recently has it been acceptable to have innovation happening outside of Silicon Valley. We're seeing more and more innovation hubs like Houston's develop outside and off the coasts. So I think it's an exciting time to be in the innovation space. And I think it's an exciting time to be in the Houston innovation space. And that's exactly why InnovationMap exists. In 2018, I joined to launch the digital product because no one was covering startups so closely. So we really filled that need. And almost 3 years later, it's kind of wild that we've come this far. And there's still just, I'm having the same issue that I had on day one. There's just so much to cover and so little time.
You're not short on stories. I think that is such a great comment, because innovation and can-do and visionary is so central to Houston's culture that it makes all the sense in the world that what the world is looking at innovation would really take root here. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Question number 2. So for us as marketing communication strategists at Newman Newman, we always, go straight to story. So if you were speaking at a national or international conference, how would you describe the story right now of Houston's rise in the innovation sector, and especially how it's shaping its future?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have to go very far to find an audience unfamiliar with the innovation ecosystem in Houston, just because it is still something I don't think we talk about enough about, but that's changing. It's really changing.
Yeah.
But if I were to, kind of explain all of the progress that has been made within innovation in Houston, I think I would really stick to the industrial pillars that have existed in Houston forever. I would talk a lot about, probably to start, the Texas Medical Center and everything that they're doing with their innovation world housed right there within TMC. And that is probably the longest standing institution within that traditional kind of startup ecosystem. And then I talk about Greentown Labs and how they recently expanded here to Houston, and how that's a huge progress made for Houston's role in the energy transition. Of course, known as the energy capital of the world, Houston needs to maintain that role, and that's going to be by leading that transition. And then lastly, I would talk about all of the really exciting space startups that are happening and that are calling Houston home and expanding and growing and raising tons of money, and are expanding in the Houston spaceport, which is super exciting. And so I would hit those pillars for sure. And then I would talk a lot about what the city has done to build the infrastructure. And I'd probably mention the ION, because that's a huge example of this the city surrounding innovation and embracing it, and really to putting that ecosystem together, at least from an infrastructure standpoint. Because we really took this approach of like, if you build it, they will come. So we have built a lot of that over the years. I've covered all of the stories of the buildings being built, and so now we have all of this, and I think we're just waiting for a few pieces to fall into place to grow even more.
I think your point is great in terms of the story, because it goes along with what you were saying before. It's kind of this perfect culture of innovation and vision meets infrastructure that is so well formed and in place, and the response is kaboom. Okay, one last question before we break this time. How does InnovationMap, and I can kind of guess your answer, but how does InnovationMap envision the contribution that it's making in that innovation ecosystem, and how important it is to Houston's future?
I think it's interesting because I like to describe myself as a very traditionally trained journalist, where you are not part of the story, you're simply the platform in which the story exists. And I have a lot of respect and responsibility as a journalist to make sure that story is being told accurately. But when I joined to launch InnovationMap, I think I learned that it's impossible to not cover the innovation ecosystem without directly affecting it, because so much startups have put so much value on, and investors put so much value on the media covering what a startup is doing. And so to be able to provide that, it's like I get emails from founders after talking with them, after writing a story about them, about the difference my 400-word article made for them and their growth. And so I had to kind of put that aside and realize that that media validation is so important, and of course it's what I'm providing for them. So it's been an interesting kind of battle between myself just to like realize that I play a role. And so that's been kind of exciting once I've realized that and embraced that, and really had the opportunity to these people are my sources. They're like my subject matter that I write about, but they're also developing as acquaintances sometimes, and really strong relationships moving forward. So I really appreciate that. It was kind of like a little perk that I didn't realize I was going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a tight-knit community for sure. All right, stop down. And then when we come back, I want to ask you some questions that I think are going to generate some great advice for companies that are operating in the innovation ecosystem.
Sounds good.